Great. Hi, good morning, everybody, or afternoon, or whenever you're watching this. Welcome to your second day of comms class. I hope you are all doing well. And I think there's going to be, we'll see how this goes, but I think there's going to be two different videos today. So in this video, what I plan to do is talk about your first speeches and how to write a speech and that type of thing, and some general announcements for the course. And then in the other video, I'm going to talk about chapters 1 and 2. So I think it'll be easier to break them up that way. Okay, so just a couple of reminders from last time. So after you watch this video and after you read chapters 1 and 2, there will be a quiz available. So again, watch this video because the information that we talk about with the speeches is going to be on the quiz. So upload that there, or not upload that, but get this information and use that when you're taking your quiz. And so that quiz will be due, you have until Monday at I'll switch it till Monday at midnight. You'll have till Monday to complete that quiz. So log into Blackboard and there's a folder that says quizzes and you'll log in to take that quiz. What we're going to talk about today in this video is your speeches, and you will have until next Wednesday to complete and upload your speech. Again, I will put the directions in the speech folder, but basically what you're going to do is you're going to tape your speech using your computer webcam like I'm doing here, or your cell phone camera, and then you will upload those into YouTube. You have a YouTube account through your Wabansi email. So you can log into YouTube using your Wabansi email. Again, you can make it unhid or private. That's not the word. But you can make it so the whole world doesn't see your speech if you want to. On that note, one thing that I want to mention is I have made the videos for this class public. And the reason I did that, somebody suggested, so now you can go and subscribe to Dr. Johnson COM, Dr. Johnson COMM, and see whenever new videos are uploaded. You will have them right there, and they'll be all in one spot, so you don't have to keep going back to each different announcement and clicking on the thing, if that's of interest to you. Okay, so for the speeches, you'll upload your speech to YouTube, and then you will copy the YouTube link and send that to me with your outline and all the stuff that we're going to talk about today. Okay, so let's talk about the speeches. Again, you'll see on the rubric for the speeches in the speech folder. There are 3 parts to the rubric. The first is kind of the general requirements of the speech. The second is a sample outline that you can use to outline your speech. And the third is the grading sheet that I will be using to grade your speech. That way you know exactly what's happening as far as the grading goes, and there aren't any surprises when it comes to that. Okay, so let's start with the first page and talk about some of the requirements. So first of all, your speech needs to be 3 to 5 minutes long. And when you're thinking about time, that has some different implications. So you want to make sure that you're not going under time or overtime, obviously. I don't care how you figure that out. Now that you're at home, you'll have more time to be more precise about that, because if you go way over time, you will be able to re-record your speech technically. So I don't think time is going to be as big of an issue now. What we see is mostly people go overtime versus undertime. So you feel like you're going to go undertime, but really you go farther overtime than you think you are. Okay, so when you're thinking about but when you're in the real world and you're thinking about how to time your speech so it is the correct time, one of the big things that you want to think about is your topic, and choosing a topic that makes sense for the amount of time that you're given. And if you're like me, you often go over. You want to talk about everything and there just isn't time to do it. And so you have problems narrowing down your topic. And so that is something that I often have problems with. Some people go in the other direction and they don't know what to talk about, so they go under time. So for this speech, this first speech is a self-introductory speech. And so the idea of this speech is to introduce yourself. Now, again, 3 to 5 minutes isn't a lot of time, so you're not going to have time to talk about everything you've ever done in the world. And so that's why I would like to refer you to those I am statements that I had you do. So your assignment for today was to come up with a list of I am statements, things that describe who you are. And what I would recommend is that you choose one of those I am statements to focus on. So maybe you're a traveler, and so you focus on talking about all the different trips that you've traveled on and that type of thing. Maybe you are a soccer player, and so you choose to talk about your life as in the world of soccer. But all those things, pick one of those I am statements to focus on, because otherwise you're just going to have too much to talk about, and so you really want to narrow down your topic in this 3 to 5 minute time frame. Okay, so you want to make sure that you are staying within 3 to 5 minutes. You will lose points for going under or over time, but it's not a lot of points. It's 1 point for every 30 seconds. So it's very minimal. But if you start to go 4 or 5 minutes over time, then that starts to be a problem. All right, the second thing that you will need to do is turn in a typed outline. And we're going to go over the format of the outline today. You can use the rubric that I gave you as an example for an outline. Also, chapters 11 and 12, the stuff that we're about to talk about right now is all located in chapters 11, 12, and 13 in your book. And so if you need more information or need to hear anything in a different light, you can go through and read those chapters, or if you need something to refer back to, and that will give you some more ideas and a different way to talk about what we're talking about today right now. Okay, so you're going to turn in a typed outline before you give your speech. And again, you will attach that to the email that you send me with the YouTube link in it. Another thing that you're going to be doing is you're going to be conducting an interview. Now we're going to talk more about sources as we go throughout the semester. So for your next speech, your how-to speech, you're going to do some research and have some sources that way. So we're going to talk a little bit about what makes a good source, what makes a bad source when we get to the next speech. But for right now, what I want you to start doing is practicing quoting an outside source in your speech. And so for this speech, what you're going to do is, since it's probably hard, maybe some of you have a Wikipedia page or a news article written about you somewhere, that's awesome. But for most of you, you probably do not. And so for this, what you're going to be doing is conducting an interview. So basically what you're going to do is you're going to interview someone else about you, which I know sounds kind of weird. But basically, so if you are talking about being a soccer player, then maybe you interview your soccer coach. And basically what you'll do is you'll come up with 2 to 3 questions that you're going to ask. A lot of times it's a good idea to have your speech all written out first, so then that way you can ask targeted questions that will fit into your speech. But you're going to ask that person 2 or 3 questions, write down their answers word for word, and then once you have those answers written down, you are going to then take a quote from those answers and use it in your speech as part of your supporting material, which we'll talk about in a minute. And I'm assuming everybody's here has learned how to write an essay or has written a speech before, so a lot of this is going to be review, but we're going to talk about it from start to finish just in case there's anybody out there who hasn't done any of this. Okay, so you'll need to conduct an interview and do that. The other thing is the type of presentation, the way that you're going to present it. And so I have my little dry erase board here that I'm going to use very sparsely because it's small and cumbersome to hold the whole time and stuff. But okay, so when you're presenting a speech, there's basically 4 different ways that you can present your speech to the audience. And so we're going to talk about those 4 ways, and this could be a potential quiz question. when you're up in front of an audience, oh, I realize this is going to be backwards, isn't it? Okay. Well, I'm going to write it backwards, and then you can deduce what it says. So this says manuscript. Okay, so the different ways to write a speech, this is going to mess everything up. Okay, so a manuscript, when you're doing a manuscript speech, it's just what it sounds like. So basically you're writing your speech out word for word, and you're reading the speech word for word off a teleprompter or off the paper in front of you. That is one type of public speaking. That has a lot of benefits. So a manuscript is especially beneficial if you have a very important message and you want to be very precise about the way you talk about it. So think about any politician delivering a pre-written speech out. When you don't want them to kind of talk about whatever they want to talk about, and it needs to be very precise. The wording needs to be very precise. It's a good idea to use a manuscript mode, because that way you know exactly what you're saying ahead of time. You can pick out those words. You know, we'll talk later about the difference between connotation and denotation. Well, one thing is differences in words. So saying, let's say saying the United States is going to engage in a war versus the United States is engaged in a conflict. Okay? Just those little differences between those words can have a huge effect on the message that is received by your audience. And so you want to be very mindful of that. And so a manuscript mode can help you become mindful of that, because it's very specifically you're talking about, you know, what it is, and you have it all chosen ahead of time, and you don't you don't deviate from that script when you're doing a manuscript mode. So you can't say something stupid that you hadn't already planned before. You can say something stupid, but it's something that you plan to say, and so hopefully it's less stupid. Okay, I'm gonna scrap the dry erase board. So the second type of way that you can speak is called memorized. So memorized speaking is just like it sounds. You basically, it's the same as manuscript in the sense that you write everything out word for word, but instead of standing up in front of the audience and reading it. Oh, so let me go back to manuscript. So manuscript is really good if you want to be very precise with your words, but if you can imagine what one of the downfalls of manuscript might be is you can sound robotic, or like you're reading, or you're not making eye contact with the audience, or those types of things. And so it can be problematic. Okay, so the second type is memorized. With a memorized script, basically, again, you are writing it out word for word and memorizing it. So again, good idea, because you have everything that you want to say, exactly how you want to say it, written out word for word. You kind of overcome that problem that you might have with the manuscript, because since you've memorized it, you're not reading off a paper, you're not reading off a teleprompter, you can very much interact with your audience. But as you can imagine, the big downfall with the memorized way is that you might forget stuff. So you might forget to say stuff, and then that just kind of throws everything off, or doesn't get your message across, or there's lots of bad outcomes when you forget part of your speech. All right, so the third type that you may use is called extemporaneous or ad lib. This is generally you don't do a speech like you would do in this class in an ad lib way. Usually this is, you know, you are in a staff meeting and somebody, you know, you win an award, or the boss asks you to report on something that you have been working on, or something like that, or you're at a wedding and you're asked to give a toast, or without preparation. So most of the time ad lib means, did I say ad lib or impromptu is the thing. Ad lib means that you're just doing it in the spur of the moment. You don't have time to prepare. Again, unless you're in like a speech competition, you probably won't do this in a formal setting with this type of researched information or that type of thing. Okay, so the good thing about extemporaneous or ad lib is you can really engage with your audience, because you have flexibility about the time or the length of the speech. You can add stuff. You can take stuff out because it's not already pre-written. So you're telling a story to your audience and they really, really are enjoying it. You can kind of ham that up a little bit versus if you're telling a story and people are looking like they have no idea what you're talking about, then maybe you move on quicker than you would if you have it all scripted out ahead of time and you're kind of following that script. The problem with ad lib, though, is because you're just saying it off the top of your head, you can forget to say stuff. You can say stuff in bad ways, so either offensive ways or just ways that don't work very well. And you can go off on tangents. There's a lot of different things that can go wrong with extemporaneous as well. No, with ad lib, I'm sorry. I'm just so you know what's going on in my communication brain, I'm finding a real distracting to watch myself while I'm talking. And so I will get over that as we move through the semester, but these first couple ones, it's messing up my brain a little. Okay, so the fourth one. So we have manuscript, we have memorized, we have ad lib or impromptu. The fourth one, which I think I've said a couple of times on accident, the fourth one is extemporaneous. Okay, so extemporaneous is kind of like how I'm speaking right now. Extemporaneous, you have an outline, you know what you want to say, you've practiced your speech many, many times, and so you've, like this, what I'm talking about, these 4 presentation styles. I've given this lecture, I don't know, hundreds of times over the years. So I've talked about this a lot. I've never done it watching myself, but I've talked about this a lot. Okay, so with extemporaneous, it's kind of the best of both worlds because you've created an outline before. Like I know that I'm talking about these 4 different styles. I talk about them in the same order every time, but I don't use the same exact words. I don't use the same exact examples every time. I don't say word for word exactly the same way. I know what they are because I've learned about them over the years, and I convey that information to my audience. So basically what I'm just using over here is an outline that says, talk about this first, talk about this second, talk about this third, that type of thing. And so what that allows you to do is it allows you to engage with your audience. You kind of get the part with the ad lib where you can interact with your audience and if something is going well, you can take a little bit longer with it. If something's not going so well, you can move on a little quicker, those types of things. You don't have a script that you're constantly looking at to read from. You usually have like a keyword outline that you're giving the information through that you're talking about. And so those are all good things. Now, the problem with extemporaneous is sometimes you can get a little too off course. Because it's not exactly scripted, that can mess with your timing a little bit sometimes. You might go too fast, you might go too slow. So extemporaneous does have some downfalls as well. Another thing is sometimes people get too informal when they start extemporaneously speaking. So extemporaneous, it's like you're having a conversation with the audience, but you don't want to get too far into a conversation with the audience. So you don't want to start dropping F-bombs and, using a bunch of slang and stuff that you might use when you're talking with your friends. So people always ask me, Ms. Johnson, can we swear in our speeches? I would say the answer to that is kind of in general, no. We'll talk a little bit about the arbitrariness of words and how they are just symbols. And so, shit is just a word, right? But when you are in a formal speaking situation, and again, this depends on the audience and depends on a lot of things, it's still pretty much frowned upon and looked down upon to, use a lot of profanity or a lot of slang. And again, this completely depends on the audience that you're giving your speech to. But for the most part, if you start, again, dropping F-bombs everywhere, then you're going to be viewed in a certain light. And maybe that's something you want, but maybe it's something you don't. So the best kind of guidelines when you're giving a formal speech is, yes, you can swear if it makes sense, if it's part of a story, if it's part of a poem or a song, if it recreates or illustrates exactly what was said or felt in the moment. Those might be appropriate times to use swear or slang, but otherwise you usually want to stay away from them. Okay, so the goal for this speech is going to be to present in extemporaneous fashion. And again, if you are looking for some more information about this, page 291 in your book has, again, it goes through these different manuscript memorized, ad-lib, impromptu, and extemporaneous. Okay, so the other thing that I want to talk about is the outline of your speech. And again, I hope you have this with you. Well, this is the grading sheet, but the outline sheet. So when we go through this, again, I'm assuming most of you have written a speech before, or at least written an essay. If you can write an essay, you can write a speech. It's the same thing. So if you've done an English essay before, you're doing the same thing. Okay, so this is going to be weird because I'm used to writing on a board right now. Okay, so the first thing that you want to do is you want to start with your introduction. And the first part of your introduction is your attention getter, your attention getting device. And your attention getter, if you are writing an essay, some common ones are maybe you use a quote, or you do a startling fact or statistic for the audience. You tell a joke or recount a funny story, those types of things. So those are all very acceptable attention getters. With speeches, you have a little bit more options because you also have an audio and a visual realm to send your message through. So when you are presenting your speech, maybe if you are talking about how you're a guitar player, maybe you start strumming a guitar and maybe your attention getter is you playing a guitar. I had one student, she was her weekend job was a birthday clown. So she got to go and be a clown on the weekends. And she walked in dressed like a clown, and that was a great attention getter. No words necessary when you walk in dressed like a clown, you get your audience's attention. So don't be afraid to use audio or visual type things. Now, that said, there's a few rules when we're talking about attention getters. So the first thing is that it needs to get your audience's attention. And that sounds redundant, but what I find is students, especially when they're giving speeches, sometimes when they're using like quotes or facts or statistics or that type of thing, they kind of rush through them. So if you're going to use a quote, you want to make sure that you're not just saying, saying the quote or saying, did you know that 99% of people have a cell phone? Well, today we're going to talk. So if you're going to do that, pause for some emphasis or make sure that you say it in a way that makes it sterling. Did you guys know 99% of people in the world have a cell phone? And obviously I just made that number up. But so you want to have kind of that emphasis and that pause instead of just sorry guys, I'm so sorry. This is really hard. Okay, you want to have that emphasis or pause because it gets the audience's attention. If you just do it as a throwaway, you're not going to get your audience's attention and your attention getter is going to be wasted. The other thing that you want to think about with your attention getter is that it needs to relate to your speech. And again, this might sound obvious, but I had a student once, he came in, he like threw his books down on the desk and everybody jumped. Okay, that's a great attention getter. And if the next thing he would have said would have been, oh, being a Wabansi student sure is hard, or something like that, great, A+ attention getter, he got everybody's attention. But instead he came in and he threw his stuff down on the desk and he said, I really like dogs. And then proceeded to give his speech about his 3 dogs and what he liked about them and blah, 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 blah. And so it almost was more distracting because we were sitting there going, okay, are those books about dogs? What do those have to do with dog? Like, does his dog chew on his books? Like, we were kind of waiting for him to bring the books back in for the whole speech. And people actually ask questions. There was time to ask questions after the speech, and they actually asked questions about it and said, what were the books about? And it was just to get the audience's attention. So, you know, doing something startling and alarming just to get the audience's attention that then doesn't relate to your speech at all isn't a good attention getter either. So it needs to get the audience's attention, but then it also needs to have some clear relation to the speech that you're doing. And then the third thing, and for this class, this isn't the case for, this isn't a blanket statement about attention getters. Sometimes you might want to introduce yourself or that type of thing. But for this class, your attention getter should be the first thing that you say or do. So that should start your speech. All right, so the first thing that you have in your introduction is your attention getter. The second part of your introduction, if you're following along on the outline that you have there, so we're going to call it a thesis statement in this class, depending on, you know, I wrote goal of speech statement and method of speech development statement. Those are different names for these parts, and so you may have seen them in different spots. So that's the only reason I did that, but we're going to call it a thesis statement. And basically your thesis is one sentence that tells the overarching main idea of the speech. And so for you today, for this speech, it's simply going to be, today I'm going to talk to you about being a volunteer firefighter or a skateboarder or whatever. So it's going to be one sentence that tells the main idea of the speech. And then the next part, the third part of your introduction is called the preview statement. And for this part of the thing, what you're going to do is preview the main points that you have in the body of your speech. So first, I'm going to tell you about how I got my job as a volunteer fire department, and then I'm going to tell you about what I do as a volunteer firefighter, and then third, I'm going to tell you about some of the hardships of the job. Okay. So your preview statement, again, it's one sentence, and it's basically saying, first I'm going to tell you about this, then I'm going to tell you about this, then I'm going to tell you about this. Okay, so those are the three parts of the introduction. In the next speeches, we're going to add a couple more parts to that introduction, but we're going to start with that basic introduction for this speech. And one thing that I want you to do is for Friday, so this is an assignment, everyone. So for Friday, what I need you to do is turn in a rough draft of that introduction. So you're going to type it out in email. Here's my attention getter. I'm going to walk in just like a clown, or I'm going to play my guitar, or I'm going to say this fact or statistic. You're going to say thesis statement, colon. Today I'm going to tell you about what it's like to be a birthday clown, whatever. And you're going to say preview, colon. First I'm going to tell you about blah, 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 then I'm going to tell you about blah, 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 then I'm going to tell you about blah, blah, blah. So it should be not in paragraph form though. I want it in outline form. So write out the different parts of it. And so you're going to write that out and then email it to me by sometime on Friday. And then what I will do is send you feedback about it and let you know if I see any challenges. If you have more of your outline, you can send more than just the intro. If you want me to look at your whole outline, that's completely fine. But send me at least the intro by Friday. And again, you can send this early if you want. The quicker you send it, the quicker you get feedback back. Okay, so that is the introduction to the speech. The next part of the speech, just like with an essay, you have an intro, you have a body, and then we'll talk about the conclusion. So in the body of your speech, the body is characterized by main points and subpoints. The main points are the main ideas that you want to talk about. And if you're thinking about writing an essay, each paragraph, right, has a main idea sentence and then, or a topic sentence, and then it has the supporting sentences underneath that topic sentence. Same thing for a speech. Your main ideas are going to be, and 2 to 4 is a general guideline. I said 3, but if you have 2, that's fine. If you have 4, that's fine. Once you start getting a little more than 4, then you start getting a little too big for your audience, and it's hard for them to understand and keep track of things. So you usually don't want to do, I mean, I can imagine a case where you would have more than 4, but generally you want to keep it lower than like 6, 7 main points. That's probably, now you want to maybe start breaking your speech into 2 speeches. Okay, so 2 to 4 main points. And it's okay, hon. Sorry, my dog's gonna come in and whine sometimes, and that's just part of working from home. Okay, so 2 to 4 main points. And again, I put 3 main points in the grading sheet, but that's flexible. That's just kind of a general idea. And so how do you decide your main point? So one good idea is to, once you have your topic, talk about being a birthday clown. Once you have your topic, is just to brainstorm all the different things that you can think about as far as what might be relevant to that. And once you have kind of that brainstorm of all those different ideas, you can start to see patterns where things might fit together, where you see, okay, well, this, and this, those are all advantages of the job. And so you can fit those into one category and label that advantages. And so maybe that's one of your main points. Or you can see this, and this are all kinds of, these are the things that I do on the job. And so if you just kind of brainstorm a list of everything that you might want to talk about, then you can break those things up and clump them together into bigger main points. Also, I put some suggestions. So if you're having trouble coming up with main points for this one, I put some suggestions. And so you are welcome to use, if you look on your outline, it says describe advantages, disadvantages as the 3 main points. So you are welcome to use those main points, but you don't have to use those main points. Those are just, if you're having trouble figuring out how to organize your speech, that's a pretty standard, generic example that fits for most topics. Is the first thing you would do is describe what that's like. So describe what it's like to be a soccer player, or describe what it's like to be a birthday clown, or describe what it's like to be valedictorian, or whatever you want to do. And then talk about what some advantages of doing that are, and then some of the disadvantages. So those were just samples of acceptable ones. You're welcome to use it, but you don't have to use it. Okay, so now once you have your main points, describe, advantages, disadvantages, now you want to create your supporting points for each of those ideas. So the first thing I'm going to do is describe what it's like to be a birthday clown. Okay, and so underneath there, you're going to have a description of what it's like. I work most weekends. I'm hired through this place here. Like, do you find your own jobs, or do you work for a company that hires birthday clowns? How did you get into the birthday clown business? Those types of things that talk about, what do you do? Do you make balloon animals? Do you do magic tricks? Do you squirt yourself in the face with water? What kind of activities do you engage in as a birthday clown? And then, you talk about so then you have that, then you go and now, okay, well, I've just described what it's like to be a birthday clown. Now I'm going to talk about the advantages. Okay, so you have your subpoints for each of those. And again, this is just like writing an essay. I bet most of you have done this before. So these are just your different paragraphs. Now, when we're talking about supporting material, this is where we have stuff to back up our supporting material. So we use 2 kind of main types of supporting materials. You can just talk about stuff that for this speech. That will happen a lot. But there are two types of supporting material that add credibility and interest to your speech. So the first one is any sort of research. Okay, so if you have something where you make a claim, and again, for this speech, because it is a self-introductory speech, you're talking just about yourself, you're pretty much an expert on that topic. And so nobody's going to be much more credible than you when we talk about research out there. But we'll get to that in a minute. So sometimes your supporting material is factual information, facts or statistics that you get from outside sources that back up what your claim is in your main idea. Okay, and again, we're going to talk about that as we go further down the semester, we're going to talk about the do's and don'ts of sources and that type of thing. But for right now, we're going to leave that. For this speech, what that's going to be for you is your interview. So for example, if you're talking about the advantages of being a birthday clown or the disadvantages of being a birthday clown, then what I would do is taper your interview questions to reflect those things. So I asked my mom what she thought, I talked to my mom a lot about different things, and I asked her what she thought was hard for me in my job. And she said, I remember the day that you came home after one of the parents had just yelled at you and you were so defeated, blah, blah, blah. Okay, so you tell that story or whatever the quote that your mom said. Okay, so for this, you're having kind of this outside person who knows about you. I asked my soccer coach what makes me a good soccer player. And she said, you always have a teamwork attitude and you bring that to the field in every game. That really brings the team together and allows us to be better together, or whatever the quote is. Okay, so sometimes supporting material can be facts or statistics or information from outside sources that back up your claim in the main point. The other thing that you might use for supporting material are stories, anecdotes. These add interest, they add credibility, they humanize your speech, they break it up so it's not all just here's this, 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 and this. Adding a story, adding an anecdote, adding a personal account can really create a speech that is relatable to your audience, that is more enjoyable to your audience. Again, it adds interest. And so that's something else that you should think about, at least for one of your supporting points. It should be a story instead of just, I like being a big sister because I can do this and I can do this and I can do this. Say, I like being a big sister because I always have somebody to count on. I remember one time when I was really low and really sad, and my friends were all busy and I didn't know who to call, and I knew that I had my sister there. She knew exactly what I needed, so she took me out and we got ice cream and okay, so whatever. You're telling the story about how instead of just saying it's nice to have a sister, now you tell an illustration. You tell a story about what that's like and really how that's meaningful. Okay, so for the body of your speech, you're going to have 2 to 4 main points clearly identified. You're going to then have supporting material. For one of those supporting materials somewhere in your speech, you only have to use one quote. You're going to use one quote from your interview. For one of those supporting materials somewhere in the speech, you're going to tell at least one personal anecdote or story to illustrate that part of it. Okay, everybody with me so far? All right, we're almost there. So now comes the conclusion. The conclusion of your speech. Basically, if you wrote a good introduction, your conclusion is easy. So basically, the first thing that you're going to do for your conclusion is you're going to summarize what you just talked about. So basically, you're just restating your thesis and your preview statement. So today, I've just talked to you about what it's like being a birthday clown. I've described some of the ins and outs of the job. Okay. And then the last thing that you're going to do is you're going to have your closing remarks. And the best closing remarks, what they do is they bring the speech full circle. So I really enjoy closing remarks that relate back to the attention getter and kind of wrap up the speech in the same way that they started the speech. So that's kind of a personal preference. You can have good closing remarks that don't do that, but to get A+ closing remarks in this class, that's what I'd like to see. So your closing remarks should relate back to your attention. Okay, so that's kind of the general outline of the speech. Again, chapters 11, 12, and 13 have detailed information about all of this. And also, I'm available to talk to you either through email or we can set up a chat available to talk to you about these speeches. So as far as the due dates go, so first of all, by Friday, which is the 3rd, make sure that you have a rough draft of your introduction typed up email it to me before Friday at the latest. And then what I will do is I will give you feedback on that speech and on that introduction, and, you know, make sure that you have a good attention getter, a good thesis, a good previous statement. By next Wednesday, you need to have your speech written, videotape your speech or webcam your speech, and then upload it to YouTube, and then send a link of that YouTube video to me via email. And what you will do in that email is you should make sure your name is in the email somewhere, please, like your full name. And that would be great if in the subject line for each of these, if you wrote Danielle Johnson speech, Danielle Johnson outline, Danielle Johnson, whatever. That's very helpful. But you will put your name and then speech. You'll put a link to the YouTube where you've uploaded it to YouTube, and then you will attach your typed outline, and you will also attach your interview questions and answers. Okay, so intros due Friday. By Wednesday, you'll submit your speech, and that will include the link to your speech, that will include the typed outline, and that will include the interview questions and answers. And what I'm going to be looking for in those interview questions and answers is a quote from those somewhere in your speech. Okay, so I hope all of this makes sense to you. Again, this is my first time doing it without being able to see your faces and seeing if there's people that are like, what are you talking about? Or, and again, getting distracted, watching myself. I'm getting better at that, but it's going to take a while. So please email me if you have any questions. And also think about the quiz. Don't forget the quiz, which is due by Monday. It will have questions from chapters 1 and 2. The questions from chapters 1 and 2 are pretty straightforward from the book. So if you read the book, take good notes. They're true, false, multiple choice questions. And then there's some short answer questions based on the stuff that I just talked about in this last video. So, you know, what's the introduction? What are the 4 modes of presentation? Those types of things. And so you should have all the information. If you watch this video, you should have all the information about those. But if you want to see a written part of it out, first of all, you can use the speech rubric that I gave you, but then also if you look at chapters 11, 12, and 13. So 11 and 12 talk about creating the speech, what we just talked about now. 13, it starts on page 291, is the methods of speech. So extemporaneous, manuscript, memorized, that type of thing. Okay. All right. Have a wonderful day. And I look forward to reading your intros. Please email me that intro by Friday. I'm going to also use that as kind of an attendance gauge to make sure that everybody who signed up for the class is in the class and doing what they need to be doing. So please get that to me. But then also it's part of your grade. And then quizzes by Monday. Okay. Have a great day, everybody.